My guest today is Dr. Ian Williams. Well, not a guest, my co-host, I should say, Ian. Um, and I think we need no introductions because the whole world knows us now.
Absolutely. It's
Yes.
absolutely viral, you know. It's just, I think we should franchise this or something, you know, make some money on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I got some science stories here that I want to go into, but I want to get your perspective. I know that you're not an expert on this, neither am I, but a couple of things happened last week. We got a new pope from Chicago. Chicago appears to have a tendency to produce interesting people.
So
Uh,
modesty, I should tell for our listeners and viewers that, you know, Gill has some association with Chicago, so
yes, yes,
has to be
yes,
noted.
that's true. So it's sort of,
Yeah,
um,
self-serving is the word.
yes, self-serving. Yes. Not many people thought I was interesting though, so that's a different story.
Yeah.
And then we had this sort of two countries in the east, India and Pakistan, sort of throwing weapons at each other. 8 billion people have worried about this for a long time because these two countries have nuclear weapons.
Correct.
And so our great president, some believe is the greatest. I'm not exactly sure because I don't have the metrics how they measure it, but um, he negotiated, he says, a peace deal between these two countries. So what I want to talk about is actually religion. So this touches on three of the world's largest religions,
Right.
and I always felt, Ian, we might get some some hate mail after this. I always felt that religion is a CNS disease that might be treated. We could invent something to treat that disease, and the disease has such negative economic value for society, right? So where do you come out on this?
Well, I, I personally do not think it's a disease. I think it reflects our the way in which our CNS, central nervous system, tries to cope with stress. So stress, if you think
Mm,
about it, looking at evolution until the development of really Homo, or perhaps even some of the more advanced apes, chimpanzees, or uh, their and our forebear, their stress was predominantly fight or flight issues, getting eaten
yeah.
by a leopard, finding food, that sort of thing. And so, if you look at the whole physiology, both
Mm,
peripherally and in the central nervous system, in response to that, releases in glucocorticoid, adrenaline, the influence of norepinephrine to damp things down, et cetera, all work very well and enable the species to thrive and evolve.
mm,
Then along comes the frontal cortex. And instead of lions, although we still obviously have dangers, which we all face physical dangers, but now most of our stress is psychological. Why didn't my boss smile at me this morning? What does my wife mean when she says this? All that sort of stuff.
or
Um, well,
economical
yes, I mean the whole
yeah,
spectrum. Well,
yeah,
economic is slightly different. Let's just
yeah,
hold that because that covers the gamut. I mean, clearly,
yeah.
if you haven't got a job and can't feed your family, that's a real stress, like starvation would be in, you know,
Hmm.
Africa a quarter of a million years ago. But I'm talking more about the kind of stress where we take data
Yeah,
and interpret it in ways that worrying, which doesn't really do a lot of good other than perhaps prepare you for a consequence.
yeah.
So,
So yeah.
can I just finish
Sorry.
one thought and I'll get to
Yeah, yeah,
religion because I
yeah,
just wanted to make that link
yeah.
before we lose it. So here we are. We have this species now which is generating a huge amount of stress on largely imagined situations. How does it treat that? Well, it can't really do anything like run or fight on those. So it has
Yeah.
to come up with a coping strategy. And one of the ways, and that's why I think religion developed and is so powerful. That's just one thought. Let me just say
Mm.
one other thing we'll come
Yeah,
back
yeah,
to.
yeah,
On
yeah.
the other side, of course, is ignorance. So as we develop early on, we didn't understand the world much.
Mm,
What causes a thunderstorm? What causes this? What causes that? And so there's a natural proclivity to try and assign it to some inexplicable force. And so you have those two things. You're
yes.
riven with fear and stress. You need some solace from that, and then you also try to understand the world and placate plagues of locusts or
Mm,
absence of rain or whatever it may be. And that then very quickly, I think, generates a need to have some, let's call it extracorporeal spiritual entity to guide and lead us. And
mm,
people then, humans being very smart, realize that, and it doesn't take long before a few priests develop to capitalize on that. And before you know
mm.
it, you've got a pope and you've got whatever.
Yeah, so that's a interesting perspective. I haven't really thought about this. So I grew up in a very Catholic family in
Hmm.
South India, and my grandparents went to church every day.
Really?
Um, my parents less so, and me not at all actually. And so there's a progression. So your hypothesis here is that religion is a sort of a stress management system
Yeah,
that in the presence of a lot of uncertainty noise that humans have invented, it's sort of a stress management system.
correct. That's how I see it.
And so, well, I mean, it has grown into its own thing now. I mean, yeah, maybe it started as a stress management system, but now, we have 6 billion people believing there is somebody out there, who's protecting them and all of that. That is where I go on the CNS side, which is, did we go too far? I mean, are people believing things that are not true scientifically?
Well, I think there are no scientific data that one can adduce for the existence of an extracorporeal intelligence or entity. So we put that aside for a moment. If I had to explicate religion, and religion is very real, and the way I tend to think about it is rather like a flock of starlings or an electron cloud.
Mm,
Or just take anyone, Christian, doesn't matter, any major religion. There's all this lore, Lore, around it, and you can tap into that and get almost anything you want.
mm,
Now, if you're willing, and since we can't prove the absence of something, you can never prove the absence of God. So there's always that possibility. And
oh, yeah.
so as long as there's that possibility, then you can sort of kid yourself. And whether your belief is 1% or 99%, you're on a
Yeah.
spectrum. And I suspect there are a lot of people, I get the sense in America today, who say they believe in God, but they don't go to church. They don't necessarily ascribe to a formal religious doctrine or belief system. But
Yeah.
they think there is something out there because why are we here? All those kinds of questions, which there are real no answer to. But can I just come back to your
Yeah.
question? And I really am not taken with it being a CNS disease, other than you say there are 6 billion or however many, yeah, probably 6 billion people in the world who are religious, and that's because, if anything, I think psychological stress is increasing.
Mm,
Existential stress is probably decreasing. I mean, if you read all the statistics, poverty is decreasing,
mm,
number of people killed in wars is it may not feel like it, but it actually is. So
mm,
the fight and flight stress is less prevalent. Psychological stress is huge. I mean, just look what's happened in the last 3 months in America, from being reasonably comfortable, pretty sure what's happening. Now everything's up in the air. It's
mhm.
enormously stressful, no matter where you are on the political or religious spectrum. So it doesn't surprise me that,
Yeah.
if anything, we're going to see a rise in religious belief and hope.
Yeah, but I mean, scientifically, at best, you could be agnostic. Atheism is cannot be proven
No,
scientifically
right.
because we don't have enough data. So anybody who is out there and is saying I'm an atheist, um, that is not really looking at it scientifically, right? So Einstein was agnostic. I think most scientists are sort of
Yeah,
agnostic.
I would agree.
They never said
Atheism
they,
is a
you know,
form of religion. There's no
yeah,
proof of it any more
yes,
than Christianity, you know. So
yeah, but they never came out and said, there's no God. I mean, we cannot prove that. So
no,
a disprovable hypothesis is not that useful. And so it's sort of an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I do find a lot of atheists in academics, they say, yeah, there's nothing out there. But we have no data on it.
no.
So how can you determine that? How can you conclude on that?
Yeah, I would actually say to them, there is something out there in the sense of being. So if I were to meet you or anybody who said, and I know you're not saying this, and who says, I'm an atheist. There's nothing out there, and I'd say, au contraire, what is out there is this electron cloud, as a metaphor of belief.
Mm,
Okay, that is outside you're not contributing to that belief, but you're surely aware of it, as are
mm,
all these other people. So they can tap into that belief and get enormous succor, hope, guidance, all this kind of thing.
yeah.
Well, that you could call that a god in some ways, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's there, so it is actually provable, tangible, and that people can tap into. The only requirement is you have to believe um, that this is all real and not just some artifice.
So I
Um,
haven't thought about this yet. So in some sense, ignorance could be considered God. Because if you don't have ignorance, if you have proven everything, then there is no God.
right,
If you haven't proven everything, then there's a possibility of God.
sure.
So ignorance is what really driving God in some sense, isn't it?
Well, I think ignorance is what keeps the idea of God alive,
Mm,
but I don't think it's what drives religion.
mm,
I come back to I mean, Marx said it's the opium of the people. People are suffering, right? They are suffering. And as I said earlier, I would suggest most of that suffering is psychological
mm,
and for which there is not an easy fix, unlike hunger, right? You can give them food or find food. But
mm,
if they are stressed about these things we were talking about earlier, psychological stresses, not much you can do about that other than offer this. And
yeah.
therefore, and however they interpret that life after death, this is a trial for me, God wants me to do this or whatever. And
Mm,
as long as, and that's why, I mean, if you look in impoverished communities, particularly early on throughout South America and now Africa, which is the largest Catholic
yeah.
community growing, right? These are poor people who are suffering, disease and privation and
Mm,
frustration. And it seems to me, if one looks broadly, that uh, belief in religions have tended to decrease with economic well-being. So
yeah.
as people get more, better economy, better jobs, et cetera,
Yeah.
then their psychological stresses can be decreased somewhat,
So you
and
need less
therefore,
insurance, so to speak.
yeah, exactly, less
So
insurance,
religion
right?
is sort of an insurance in
Well,
many
I would
ways. Yeah.
caution you, Gail,
Yeah.
anybody watching this, you use very pejorative words, ignorance, insurance. I mean, yes, but it smacks a little bit of condemnation. I would rather suggest that it's, I mean, insurance is a contractual thing, saying, okay, well, look, I'm at risk, therefore I better believe in God. I don't
Mm,
think it works like that. I think it's, I'm at risk. Oh dear. And somebody says, well, if you believe in Christ or whomever, Muhammad,
yeah.
you can find solace and succor and a community and all these things to assuage your suffering in some way. So,
Yeah. So, well, I'm coming from my background here, and so I have many aunts and great aunts who were nuns.
yeah,
They spent a lot of time in Africa and other things. When I was growing up, I was told that yeah, you have to go to church, otherwise you go to hell.
right.
Um, So I went to church. I was an altar boy and all of that. I went to church as an insurance. I didn't want to go to hell.
Did you really
uh,
believe then that there was a God, though? That's why you went?
yeah, 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 totally, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Mhm.
I said, this seems like it's okay for me to go there and listen to somebody stand up and talk baseless things. Um, and it's an okay thing for me to do it's a risk management process, right? So, I didn't want to go to hell. And that's why I did that. And we are dropping off on religious spectrum, which is a problem for one party in the U.S. now, and now we have elected a pope from Chicago who seems to think very differently from the president and the vice president,
Mm.
yeah, so to speak. And so we have a problem here in the sense that um, you have to now think about, what do people think? You know, yeah, it is not a continuous function as religious folks make it out to be. Many of them asked, I think, the question, is this really true? And they didn't get an answer. So they say, well, I'm going to do some risk management thing here because I didn't, I didn't want to go to hell. Um, and that's where we are. So we have two countries with nuclear weapons throwing stuff at each other, and one country believes their religion is superior to the other, another one believes the same, and it is a problem for 8 billion people, you know. Uh, and so where do you come out on this? Yeah.
Yeah. So, can I just put another thought out on the earlier part of our discussion? Um, I've always felt that it's for one, I'm going to use your vocabulary now, it's the corruption of religion which causes the problem.
Mm,
So if you look at the at Buddha, Muhammad, Christ, the leaders or founders perhaps of the various religions, their teachings are remarkably similar. I mean,
yeah.
remarkably similar.
Yeah.
Um, and there are sort of, I think it's every major religion in the world. One way or another that says, do unto others as you have them do unto you.
Mm,
And if people would adhere to that that aphorism, if you like,
mm,
we would have no problem. But it's then the corruption um, by the power structures. And
yeah.
we've talked about this in the past, and perhaps we could explicate this more. I'm a firm believer in our tribalism. We talked about we evolved in groups of 150. You have a different headdress from me. You have a different eye fold than me. You have a different color, whatever it may be. And
Mm,
therefore, boom, there's reasons you're going to come and take my food, take my children, whatever. So that then gets harnessed by the power of religion, and but pretty soon the teachings of Christ are irrelevant. I mean,
mm,
in America, I don't know how many different kinds of Christian churches there are. I mean, you go in
mm,
down south, there's like 15 different churches, all with slightly different names. And you say to one, well, why don't you go to? Oh, I couldn't go to those. Whatever. So it's this corruption that I think is really damaging. I don't think religion per se, if
mm,
one were to practice it by the original tenets, would
yeah.
be half the problem. So that brings us on to either Israel and Gaza, um, uh, India and Pakistan. Um, Now, I suppose a lot of people coming to India and Pakistan, right? So a lot of people would say it's the damn Brits. If they hadn't divided the country, it would have been interesting. So I knew there were riots and
Mm,
tremendous antipathy. To what extent that was fostered by 300 years of colonial whatever, I don't know. But I think that if that had been just allowed to work itself out, maybe
mm,
it would have been a civil war like every other country's had. I don't know. I think we might be in a much better place today than the separation. So, in any case, you know how it is. You take a bunch of school kids,
yeah.
30, give one a red shirt, one a yellow shirt, and they're at each other's throats, for no
Yeah.
reason other than that.
So I can talk to you about this. So I think the Brits missed a trick. They should have told India and Pakistan, just remember, if you guys were together, how powerful a cricket team you could make. You'll win every game that, you
Good
know.
point.
So they missed a trick there. So I want to go into another, a different idea. So on Science News, it says chimp chatter is a lot more like human language than previously thought.
Mm,
Chimpanzees combine hoots, calls, and grunts to convey far more concepts than with single sounds alone. It may be the first among non-human animals. So, yeah, I always felt, I've been listening to some Noam Chomsky recently for some other podcast. Um, I always felt that we don't quite understand the non-human communication aspect. We sort of put them down all the time. Say, they're talking things that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense to us, but they have their own language. So where do you come out on this?
oh, I have absolutely no doubt. And for a long time, elephants, porpoises, whales, um, birds. I mean, so in common with a lot of people, perhaps who may be watching here, you can get an app to identify birds based on their call. And then it will also have recordings of, I don't know, 16 different kinds of calls of that bird.
Yep.
Warning of a predator, da 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 da. So, okay, so you might say that, well, that's pretty basic, right? But clearly, as you move up the evolutionary tree, the sophistication becomes greater. Now, as you well know, it seems to be that speech is engendered by a Hox gene, which is different or missing, let's say, in
Mm,
lower species, hence their inability to articulate sounds as we can. But in terms of body language, vocalizations, as you talked about, smell, there are many, many sophisticated ways in which they can communicate. And I think
mm,
we're now only beginning to appreciate that because of technology in large
mm,
part. Well, both two things. One is paying attention to it, but also I think this is part of another, perhaps another discussion, and that is the rights of animals. As we move away from bear baiting and goodness knows what other horrors we've imposed on animals, to now trying to be more respectful, worrying about their place in the ecosystem. We're
mm,
also now paying more attention to them and their possible vocalization and trying to understand what they mean and what they. So I'm not surprised that we start to find these kinds of things,
mm,
particularly amongst chimpanzees. So I believe it's absolutely true. And that's been quite well demonstrated. And as you just deduced, there's more and more
mm.
studies coming out. Um, and I think we have a lot to learn from that. Yeah, I'm not sure what more there is to say about that. I mean, are you
Mm.
surprised that there would be this kind of communication?
I'm not surprised, but I'm just thinking about technology. So OpenAI is now saying they have run out of internet data. Pfizer is not going to put out their private data for
Yeah.
100 years into the OpenAI thing. And so unless private data comes in, they're done. So GPT 6.0 will be approximately same as GPT 5.0 because there's no more data. So this might be an interesting avenue for artificial intelligence to say, well, we can get the proprietary data from humans. Maybe you can go out into the wild and talk to the chimps.
Mm,
Maybe that might make
yes.
AI a little bit more
Right.
interesting. I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very interesting thought, Gil. I never had that thought. Yeah. So, well, it would be particularly interesting. Let's say if um, pick anything really, but some animal was able to detect water in ways that we cannot yet and could
Yep.
communicate that. So if we understood that by virtue of whatever communication it was using to its friends or family, that would be a huge plus. Yeah, I think that's a very exciting idea. Yeah.
So I want to go into another topic, Ian. So I mean, you can bring up topics. I'm just
Sure,
looking at
sure.
the science mag here. So Denisovans inhabited Taiwan. New fossil evidence suggests. So Denisovans, as you know, is sort of a forgotten
Yeah,
branch of humanoids,
yeah,
and it's when we don't have all the data, so it's unclear how much. So if you do the your blood test now, they say you're this much Neanderthal and this much Denisovan.
hmm
I did mine. Mine was like 4% Neanderthals and 1% Denisovan.
hmm
But we don't really know how this whole thing happened, right? So you say Denisovans inhabited Taiwan. And so do you so what is your sort of expectation on this? Is this sort of geographic um, segmentation of humanoids? I mean,
yeah. So I
yeah,
think
go
that
ahead. Yeah.
Neanderthals came before Homo sapiens into Europe, were quite a successful um, entity, and were obviously still there when Homo sapiens migrated and obviously interbred. There's been a lot of work to look at the genes that have been retained
Mm,
from Neanderthals. I don't know if it's been done for the Denisovans or not, but and that these could confer an important immune strength. Um, and since we've now become so polygenic that I don't think there's going to be any further selection, but there may have been selection earlier on to keep those
mm,
genes by virtue of disease resistance or what have you. Um, and the fact that Denisovian DNA is still there, I'm not up to speed enough on this to determine whether it's just sort of carried along because the Denisovian genes are close to essential genes in humans when they actually interbred, as it were, or whether there are some traits in those Denisovan genes which are better, let's say,
mm,
than the ones in humans. But then you'd have to ask yourself the question, well, why didn't they dominate? Why is there only a
mm.
2% or what the average? Because I think the average Neanderthal is somewhere between 2 and 4. I mean, it's not much
The
more than
answer,
that.
Ian, is that the
Mm.
Homo sapiens are very efficient killing machines,
Yes,
I would
yes,
say.
that's true. That's true. But they did interbreed. I mean, they did
Yeah.
clearly, clearly. And I mean, okay, so maybe it was rape or whatever, a dominant tribe or not. Maybe it was something else. But whatever the reason, they interbred, and that offspring clearly had survival benefits. I mean,
Mm,
they didn't die out. They weren't just viewed as some kind of a mutant by the rest of the species and
mm,
killed or whatever. So I think is there are data in the literature which I've read, and I
yeah.
can't deduce the sources now, which suggests that Neanderthal genes do confer strength and advantage. And I think it's really in the immune system, which might make sense.
Mm,
But don't forget Neanderthals are much more sophisticated than we thought they were. I mean, they
mm,
have clear burial rituals. They carved figures. They had first art before Homo sapiens.
mm.
So yeah, there's a lot of things going for them. Denisovans are interesting because very little is known. I mean, these come from, well, the Taiwan finding is interesting. Prior to that,
Yeah.
it was like half a tooth or something. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of data to explicate that. Um, yeah. For
Yeah,
me,
I
oh, go ahead.
remember. I remember, Ian. So when I did my, sort of a genome test, I came out 4% Neanderthal.
Hmm.
Typically in Asia, it's a little bit less, but it's
Yeah.
approximately the same.
Is that right? Mm.
Yeah. So, and I was telling Gia, and she was very happy. You are sort of Neanderthal. I was
We knew it
telling
all
her
along.
that
Break in over
you have
here
the
and
same
kill
thing.
me a mammoth.
Yes. So I want to go into something very tactical. It says here how to fight Lyme may lie in the biology of its disease causing bacteria. Um, so we live very close to a
At the
town called
epicenter, I
Lyme
would
and
say.
Old Lyme.
Yes.
So this is actually quite interesting for us. You say here between somewhere between 90,000 and nearly 500,000 people are diagnosed and treated for Lyme diseases each year in the United States. About 15% of those people continue to experience symptoms, including fatigue, body aches, and memory problems,
Right.
even after the acute phase of the disease is treated. Um, so, so if I understand this correctly, this is a mosquito-borne disease or
No,
uh,
tick. It's a
a
tick bite.
tick-borne disease.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there are many, not only is there Lyme, but there are, I think, I think, I don't think I'm overstating, there are 10 other um, really um, terrible diseases that are promulgated by ticks. And don't forget, this is not a bacterial, it's a sort of a microorganism that's
Mm,
transferred in the tick bite. But just there's a thing called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is conferred, or the vector for which is a tick, which makes
mm,
one allergic to red meat. So I had a friend who contracted that, and unbeknownst to him, and
mm,
then out of nowhere, whenever he ate red meat, he got this violent sort of allergic reaction, and that
mm.
was the cause. Anyway, so this is interesting. I don't know if this is splitting off a little bit, but I think it's very much the same thing. Aspergillus is a fungus, and
Mm,
it where a lot of people are infected with it, and they manage it pretty well. And some kinds of Aspergillus are not toxic. Others are
yeah.
really quite toxic. Global warming, by changing humidity and temperature conditions, as
Mm,
for many other insects and species, is now causing its spread.
mm,
So it's likely by, I think, certainly by 2100, but who knows how rapidly things change,
mm,
that we're going to see huge numbers of people becoming infected, particularly it goes into your airways. And so if you
mm,
have things like asthma or cystic fibrosis or other immune compromising diseases, that can be really bad for you. And so I think it is also with ticks. So ticks are moving further
yeah.
north and further throughout the rest of the world. So that's an interesting side effect of
Mm.
global warming. We tend to think, I want to come back to global warming for a little bit because, I mean, this has been discussed ad nauseum, but
Mm,
something that I think is hadn't really hit me is when I tend to think about global warming, I tend to think of extreme weather, fires, hurricanes, floods, right? And there's a huge threat to the littoral, to the coastlines, which will cause enormous challenges and
yeah.
migrations and God knows what. But now there's this other, and then there are species that are dying out because of that. Okay,
Mm,
but now there's this other thing of the generation of diseases that
mm,
were perhaps in just the Congo or some really humid, relatively unpopulated area, now spreading through the rest of the world.
mm.
So we really have, it's going to be a big deal. And
So let me push on that a little bit, Ian. So the problem is policy. So President Obama invested $500 million into some solar company in Arizona,
yes,
made nothing. Um, and so, yeah, so you can get very excited about the environment. I know a lot of people who are excited about the environment, but solar, wind, um, and even hydrogen to some extent are not solutions to the
no,
environmental problem. So,
clearly
so
not.
the policy challenge here is, yeah. So it's great to get excited. We have a lot of people in Scandinavia excited about the environment, um, but you have to show me data. Why? So I always advocated for like 25 years now that when you put investments into solar or wind or any other new technology, you have to show the net effect of that. So electric vehicles is a good example of this. Um, there's a guy in California, churning out electric vehicles every 30 seconds. but then he's mining all the lithium in
Right.
Africa,
Yeah.
and we don't care about that because it's in
No. No.
Africa. And these are not solutions. These are just you know
I know.
tactical
I never.
band-aids.
I
Yeah,
agree with you 100%, Gil.
yeah.
And that if I did, that wasn't my intent to. But I was simply pointing out we're worried about that, and I think that a lot of people, particularly people who might be to the right of the political spectrum, say, "Oh, okay, so things flood. Well, move away. This is respond to. You got hurricanes. Well, build better housing, whatever." And that's, you could say that, right? And they're probably of the view, okay, so a few million people die, but they're all going to be in India and Pakistan, where all the water will flood in, and the Ganges will dry up. So what? The glaciers disappear. So, you know. 80 million people who depend on that water, well, they'll just have to move. I mean, there is that kind of thing. They don't
Mm,
think of it affecting themselves in the very real way that I was suggesting, that,
mm,
hey, you could get bitten in your garden because of this global warming and come up with some god awful disease that you can't protect yourself. Oh, we can get drugs. Well, these
mm,
diseases are very, aspergillus, for example, is very plastic and will accommodate all kinds of things.
mm.
Um, but to come back to your earlier comment, yes, most of these green technologies are hopeless. I mean, they
Yeah.
do something, right? But you have to have fusion. And I don't want to go down the rat hole of fusion. But if we put all the money that we're currently putting into
Yes.
alternative fuels to
Yes.
solving fusion containment, which is a
Yeah.
solvable problem, it's not faster than the speed of light, it will be solved.
It's an
And
engineering
then,
problem. So
yes,
typically we
exactly.
solve engineering problems. Yeah.
We solve them all the time.
Yeah.
And now it's become very vogue to say, oh yeah, well, people talk about fusion. It's always in the next 10 years. It has been for the last 100 years. But no, it's going to be solved. And that's really to me a
Mm.
solution that could work. And
So it's only solution on the table, I would
right,
argue. If you don't get
other than
fusion,
nuclear.
mm, so I lived in the nuclear industry for a long time. I don't think fission is a sustainable technology unless we can get 100% probability that we can shoot it out to the sun. The spent fuel thing.
Yeah,
Um, it's a problem. So fusion is really what's going to save us.
yeah,
Fusion and room temperature superconductivity. So these are
yes,
two things I thought in
yeah,
in uh, in the 1980s at Northwestern. I thought this will be solved in like 5 years. I mean,
yeah. Me too.
why
I thought
should
so
why
too.
should we worry about these things? But it hasn't been
Right.
solved.
Yeah, I
And
think there
so,
just hasn't been
yeah,
enough investment.
yeah,
Well, I think it's always two things. It's putting the money in, but then also, unlike our current regimen, instead of gutting our University of Nobel laureates, we should be putting more in there that are going to solve, the containment problems and the mathematics and the physics necessary to do that.
yeah,
Um, one thing I would like to bring up, Gil, which this is on the same vein, not about global warming per se, but that is microplastics.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I have always been, I continue to be appalled um, by the amount of waste we all generate. But even more appalled, and I don't know how many of our listeners know this, even though it's becoming quite widely documented now, is that we religiously separate our plastics and paper and all this stuff,
yeah.
and people come and take it away in separate containers, and then
We
it
don't know
all
what they
gets
do with it.
well. I do know what they do it. What they do with it is then send it to
Yeah.
Pakistan and
Oh,
Africa.
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. You should read about this, girl. This
Hmm.
is fascinating. So these countries are making money on that. Okay,
Yeah.
because there's no environmental controls. People are more than happy to pick through all this stuff and try and dig out bits of gold or metal or whatever it may be for
Hmm.
pennies. Um, so we are actually making the problem much worse, because
Hmm.
instead of recycling them here, turning all the plastic bottles into park benches or things like that, which we think is what's happening, and recycling the fibers into new clothes.
And
We're
spending
actually
energy to
just,
send it over there. I
well,
mean,
we
that's
spend energy
also,
to ship it there, and then B, when it goes there, it just gets in these huge piles, you know.
mm,
So that's something worth looking at. But the other thing that comes about from our waste is microplastics. So
mm,
I don't know if you read the report, but there have been several recent reports now where the I think it's the average person has 7 grams of microplastics in their brain,
in
which
the
is about the
brain, yeah.
size, yeah, size of a teaspoon. All right. So imagine we've all got this plastic teaspoon worth of plastic in our brain.
We might
Furthermore,
get more intelligent, Ian. So
well,
we
there you
haven't
go.
really
Could be.
proven
Could
it's a
be. Well,
bad
at
thing.
least yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. But
Yes.
but children, neonates who haven't ingested anything other than maternal
Mm,
nutrient have microplastics. It's coming through the placenta from
yeah.
the mother. So
Yeah.
the reason why I bring this up is at the same time as all this is being found out, microplastics are being shown, not too surprisingly perhaps, to cause cells to mutate. um,
Mm,
so you may have this amazing time bomb that is
mm,
now in virtually the whole world's population.
yeah.
Okay. People like us who are towards the end are probably going to get away
What?
with it. That's that comes back to living longer, which we talked about earlier. But in the next 20 years, I doubt
Yes.
whether the microplastics in our brain is going to precipitate Alzheimer's or whatever. But the
Mm,
microplastics in some 10-year-old or 20-year-old or 30-year-old
mm,
is almost certainly going to produce. And I can't imagine a more difficult medical challenge than removing microplastics from our brain. I
yeah.
mean, it's not going to be a drug that does that. Maybe there's an AI bot that can go in, but
Mm,
even so, do you just think of the scale? It's incredible. So all this worrying about other things, who's
yeah.
going to win the cricket match between India and Pakistan, or who's
That's
going
the
to pay
most
the
important.
highest?
That's the
I
most
understand
important
that.
thing.
After that,
Yes.
who's going to win the tariff war? Perhaps we ought to be a little bit more concerned about the plastic that we're putting into our kids' brains, because they're going to suffer the consequences of that when they're
Mm.
30, perhaps, or 40.
So I don't have any strong opinions on this, Ian. So now just reading Science and Society here, 1.8 billion in dollars in NIH grant cuts hit minority health research the hardest. Um, so let me take a very controversial position here for debate. If Homo sapiens are generally the same, why are we spending significantly skewed resources on one category or the other? I mean, it's all the same, isn't it?
Well, not quite. So, for example, and this is not my area of expertise, but I think well, I know this is well documented. African Americans, and I think that I don't know if that also extends to Black people in other parts of the world,
Yeah,
are much more susceptible to hypertension. Now, you could say,
yeah.
oh, is that a dietary factor? They tend to be poorer on the whole. They tend to perhaps eat more fatty fast food. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think it is somehow part of the genetics. And so there's been quite a lot of studies on that and trying
Mm,
to find drugs that are more efficacious in that population. And I think that's very
yeah.
important and should be done. And I think that's also true for women versus men. Women have been largely ignored in terms
Mm,
of health research, except for specific fertility issues or things like that. And they're very different in many ways in terms of how they respond. But perhaps your broader question is why your question is really why is for want of a better word, the Caucasian population the really the target of drugs? Is that what yours?
No, no. So I was asking more generally, why is a segmentation? So suppose genome data tells us we got 8 billion clones in
Yeah.
the world. Um, I think that's what the genome data tells us, actually. And so, why is that, we have to spend more money on this population or the other?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
I
yeah,
already sort of gave an answer. To pick another
yeah,
thing, Asian populations tend cannot metabolize alcohol so well, so they have different drug metabolism competencies.
Mm,
So if you're going to get a drug which is efficacious in those populations, you need to be cognizant of that difference. I mean,
mm,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't automatically assume that because a drug will work in, let's say, a Caucasian population, if you take
mm.
it into Asia, that it's going to work because it might be metabolized very differently. But that's relatively small potatoes. But it's an issue, right? And that's just driven by markets. Is there a market there? Um,
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
but
yeah. So,
yeah,
see, you know more about this than I do. So, when we were in the large pharmaceutical company, when we did clinical trials, we had to do a bridge study to the
yes,
Japanese population. That's the only
correct.
bridge study that we ever had to do,
Yes, for the
with the
reasons I just
premise,
mentioned.
yeah, with the premise that, there's a different population there.
Yeah,
But the other 7.7 billion
hmm,
appeared to be approximately the same,
yeah,
regardless of skin color, regardless of origination, regardless of whatever, right? So, why is that we have to spend so much effort and money and time on segmentation studies?
mm,
It's very unclear to me. Yeah, so I'll
yeah.
let you react to it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, sort of recapping what I said in some ways, it, there clearly are some differences, and I just talked about, but I'm not up to speed on whether that's been um, fleshed out more as more and more genome sequencing and more trial data has been um,
Mm,
accomplished. The other thing, though, is the point I mentioned earlier, which is dietary or nutrition.
mm.
So I think in most populations in the world, but particularly when there's a skin color difference or a religious difference, where there is a smaller group that can in some way be disparaged, vilified, whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
who will, as a result, um, have poorer nutrition, more stress, live in polluted areas. It's certainly the case for the black population here.
But that's
Roads are
not a
put.
life sciences. That's not a
Well,
life
it is.
sciences problem.
It
Yeah.
is. It is for the following reason.
Okay.
Because, if you put an interstate right through the middle of a black housing area, then
Yeah.
they are exposed to lead, well, less so now, but asbestos, all kinds of other toxins from
No, that's a
cars.
social sciences problem, but not a
But it
life
becomes a
sciences problem.
clinical problem because they are showing up with diseases not that aren't present elsewhere, but are much more prevalent or worse,
Mm.
right? They tend to be more overweight because I mentioned earlier, they don't have the resources to be able to afford fresh food like others can. Now it's a continuum and it's not, one thing or the other. But I just thought those are two things. I mean, you're right. Um, with all the caveats we just mentioned, we are the same. So, but there may also be a marketing issue
Mm.
in the sense that there may be a lot of skepticism, which increases now, fact free. The big drug companies are not paying attention to X, Y, or Z population because they're poorer or whatever it may be. The market isn't so great there. Therefore,
Yeah.
by being able to say, well, this has been our test population reflects the the wild population
Yeah.
is important.
So, where I'm coming from, Ian, I want to get your perspective on this. If it is so, suppose we decide that it's sort of hardware issue. We got 8 billion clones in the world. It has to be environment. It has to be diet. It has to be epigenetic
Yes, that's right.
aspects to
Yes,
the genome.
yes,
And so that is not necessarily a life sciences policy question. It is actually a
yes.
social sciences
No, you're quite
policy
right in that
question, right?
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and I think that's why I mean it gets into the whole issue of public health, as as we both know, and I think as most people realize when you think about it, a dollar invested in public health is going to reap much better benefit than a dollar invested in the 18th
Mm.
antidepressant, right? So
Almost
that's this.
infinite, almost infinite return.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess as we were both saying. So then cutting down on pollution from roads, getting clean water, all the things that we know, which aren't being done because they don't win votes, or they don't make money, and governments want taxes, all that stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's that is a real problem. That is, but I just want to say one more thing about the
Yeah. Yeah.
microplastics in case anybody listens
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
this, to try and get people excited about this, because
Yeah.
unlike uh, exhaust pollution or other things for which we have a potential solution. We may not
Mhm.
do anything about it, but at least try not to live next to a road if you can possibly afford it. I mean, a big state highway.
Mhm.
Um, Microplastics you can't do anything about. I mean, you just
Mhm.
can't avoid them. So okay. So what here? Why talk about it? Well, I don't know. It's just something that's really
Yeah, I mean,
scary.
it's systemic. It's systemic to society. So whatever,
Yeah.
if you want to improve the life of humans, there is a backdoor way that humans' health is sort of compromised. That's because we've been doing this for like 100 years. I don't know where plastics were invented. When do you think they
Well,
were invented?
well, it really, I mean, they were invented quite early in the 30s and 40s for things like Bakelite, but the real explosion, I think, took place in the early 70s when you had
Early
mass
70s.
polyethylene and bags and all. Bags are the real
Yeah.
problem, plastic bags. So,
Yeah, I love plastics. I mean, these things, I can carry
of course,
stuff.
absolutely.
Uh,
They're very convenient. I mean, think about
it's
syringes, right? It used to be, I remember glass syringes, and
yes,
now,
yes,
of
yes.
course, you never dream of that.
So, so you may have some expertise on this. So I was looking at health and medicine here. So Ozempic, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Wegovy
Wegovy,
ingredient may reverse signs of liver disease, it says here. Um, so we have a statins. You and I had talked about this before. That seems to extend life. Um, we have some other agents that a lot of people take and seems to be pretty useful. So now we have this new agents, Ozempic and Wegovy. It says may reverse signs of liver disease. Well, the diabetes and weight loss drug semaglutide reverse
yeah.
liver scarring and inflammation. It's among several drugs that works for the condition. Um, so let me ask you a loaded question. Is it that these companies are trying to find some additional advantage to their drugs, or is it really true?
Is it really true that semaglutide causes liver problems and Wegovy doesn't, or that Wegovy and Ozempic cause liver problems? I got a bit confused about what you said.
Yeah, so what it says here is that Ozempic and Wegovy may reverse signs of liver disease, is what it's saying. So it's probably very difficult to prove because if you have liver disease, I would imagine you're obese,
You could
and
you could
you have
probably sort that out. I mean, you still, although it seems like everyone is taking it that can afford it.
yeah,
I think it would not be too difficult to see. I haven't seen the study you're referring to,
yeah,
but too difficult to see over a prolonged period. Now that people have been taking Wegovy or Ozempic for
mm,
1 to 2 years, um, that you would see an increase in liver disease or toxicity if that were true, relative to a population of diabetics or obese people who didn't. So let's assume it is true, okay,
yeah.
for the sake of argument. Your question then is what?
Um, so are we designing in effects, we meaning the pharmaceutical companies, designing in effects that sort of gives an aura of an additional effect? Um, you say, well, you take my drug. If you have liver disease, it might actually reverse it. I don't think there's enough
Reverse it. Is that
data.
what you're not make it worse, but reverse? Is that what you're saying?
Reverse it, yeah, reverse it.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Well, because it's interesting you should say that because I was talking to a physician the other day, and we were talking about this, and she was saying, well, um, you know, for my patients, unless they are type 2 diabetic or they, are clearly quite seriously overweight, I would
Mm,
caution them not to take it because we don't have enough data yet. And it is quite an interesting hormone, GLP-1, and it could have cancer effects and blah, 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 blah.
mm,
So, okay, so let's put that aside. So are they? I don't think so, because Ozempic, you're going to see reports on Ozempic ameliorating or decreasing severity of Alzheimer's, for sure. That's already been talked about. And don't forget, other drugs
just
like
because of the weight loss
no,
or some other
no,
effect?
some
Yeah,
other effect. Metformin, for example, will increase GLP-1 levels. And
yeah.
that's thought to be some of the way in which metformin causes weight loss. It's not as robust as Ozempic, but it's
Mm,
certainly there. And metformin has also been suggested to ameliorate Alzheimer's and various forms of cancer.
mm,
So yes, I suppose who am I or we or anybody to say that um, um, these drugs do not decrease liver disease.
mm,
It would be interesting to see the trial data, but I'm sure that drug companies are looking for this, and they should be. I
mm,
mean, they absolutely should be. If I were in charge of a program, and if I were looking at the most important entity
mm,
for Denmark, which is what it currently is in terms of GDP, I would sure as hell be saying, look, I want to look at it against every single disease known to man.
mm,
Um, and I think we'll find that it has pleiotropic effects. I think it would be very much like aspirin, statins, beta blockers, and as we've discussed before, metformin.
yeah,
They had one early indication, and that's often in the case for drugs. You may remember from your time, but
yeah.
I remember very clearly when I first joined the industry, being quite shocked at the number of drugs that were being used for things other than their original discovery,
Mm.
approval, indication. Because once you get them out into a large population, you start to see
Yeah.
these things. So I think that's
So,
great.
yeah, so from policy perspective, Ian, would you go as far as, um, well, I think we are taking fluoride out of the water, I guess, right now. But would you go as far as saying beta blockers and metformin and others, Lipitor, atorvastatin, low dose of these things actually life enhancing,
Oh, sure,
and
no
hence
question.
and hence we should be putting that into water.
Well, of
Uh,
course, yeah,
yeah,
yes, I do strongly. I've felt that
yeah,
for many many years, and I think a lot of physicians would concur. The problem, particularly in America, is of course
mm,
nobody likes to be. So I mean, we're dealing with this terrible situation now of fluoride, right?
yeah,
Fluoride has been proven unequivocally
yeah,
to decrease tooth decay. And tooth decay, not only does it, cause your teeth to rot and give you bad breath, etc., it also
mm,
causes myriad other diseases. And
yeah,
yet here we have something that's cheap, readily available, can be put in the water, and it would fix it all. But no, that's going to be got rid of because some crackpot says, well, it increases autism or something like that, which has
yes,
clearly been shown not to be the case. So there has to be that freedom. So what I think could happen, though, it would be great if the Surgeon General, we're talking in
mm,
America now, were to say, I would strongly encourage everyone to
mm,
talk to their GP and get on a low dose of beta blocker, statin, aspirin, and
mm.
you know. But
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
not going to
the
happen.
message there is talk to your GP.
Yeah,
Um, you and I are not doctors, so we just saying all the stuff.
of course.
And so I want to go into something completely different. I don't know if you have
But
followed
excuse
this.
me, Gil, can I just
Yeah,
so here's a challenge to you, and as I think most people
yeah,
watching this will know, you have a separate life as a podcaster. I would encourage you to
yes.
find of course, it'd be great if we, well, not our Surgeon General now, but somebody of stature in the medical
Yeah,
community, and just
yeah,
run this idea by them. See what they
yeah.
say. Obviously, he or she is not going to commit, but it would be interesting to get a truly medical perspective from someone who's, as a medical friend of mine says, has actually put a hand
Mm,
on a hot belly and treated somebody. So
mm.
that would be a challenge for you to try.
Yeah, I could definitely try. I mean, the three people listening to this, Ian, you, me, and
You mean and your
Miss
mother, right?
X. Uh, and I know that you haven't really thought about this. So quantum physics, sort of quantum chip and all that stuff is going on. A quantum computer, I should say.
Yeah.
And Microsoft came out and said they have a sort of a interesting quantum chip, and it's called Majorana, I guess. Majorana qubits could be error resistant. It says here,
Yeah.
but most physicists disagree with this idea. So it's sort of closer to my intuition, which is when you let these large companies into new ideas, they'll come up with something, but it's not going
Mm.
to work. you know,
Right.
it's a grand statement. Artificial intelligence,
Yeah,
quantum.
yeah. I'm all for this. I have absolutely no
Yes.
problem. But I would have more of a problem if the NIH or some publicly funded institution were
Yeah.
to start putting money into this or talking it up inappropriately. But if
Mm,
Microsoft is, let's say, it's shading the data somewhat, overstating their progress, whatever,
mm,
fine. They're the only ones going to lose. Okay, perhaps there were people who buy stock. Well, caveat emptor, right? I mean, you've always got to be. I have no problems if people want to buy their stock and boost the company, but eventually it will show up. It either works or it doesn't. And if a private company does it, more power to them. So I'm all in favor of that. And it's rather like, for me, it's rather like fusion. This will be solved. I mean, we will have quantum computing, no
Oh,
doubt.
no, 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 no. So
You
let
don't
me
think so?
disagree with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, fusion is an engineering problem.
Yes.
Quantum computing is not an engineering problem at
Mm.
all, actually. Uh, in fact, we don't really know what quantum mechanics is yet.
Well,
And
yes, that's true, but you don't need to.
you have to. You,
No, you
you
don't.
you have to have
No,
a
you don't.
fundamental understanding of quantum
We,
mechanics
I
before you can
disagree.
get a quantum computing.
No, no, no. I think we can predict quantum effects without having a true understanding of how a particle or how an entity can be both a particle and a wave function and how it moves between them. You can certainly do that. I mean, so I disagree with you there. Um,
Yes.
and the whole, as you well know, I mean, the advantage, of course, it can be 1, 0, and something in between. Then and it can by having all those all this cannot options, it can do exponentially more of certain
Mm,
kinds of calculations. Not other things. A traditional computer is already better, but
mm,
even with the small, I think there's 8 qubit or whatever. I mean, fairly small entities have been able to do calculations that can't be done on a normal machine. So, I mean, it's happening. Even though you may not understand, you have this general sense. Why is that a problem for you?
yeah, I'm less of a technologist than you, Ian.
Well, I
So,
don't know that I certainly you've read as
uh,
much as this as I have. I'm not a quantum physicist, believe me. Although I'd
no,
like to play one on
neither am
TV.
I. Yeah, so there's a problem here. So, what we mean by engineering problem is that we know the physics. So we know fusion. I mean, every morning there is a thing that rises on the east and goes on the west. We know that thing is fusing things,
Yeah,
hydrogen into helium. And so there is no problem from a fundamental perspective.
right.
Um, Quantum mechanics, though, is Feynman said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand it.
yeah,
and that remains to be true
yes,
today.
yes.
And so we cannot get a quantum computer, I would argue,
But we
without
already have,
understanding
Gil.
quantum physics. Yeah.
We already have. That's just I. So, for example,
No, we don't have a quantum computer.
yeah, we
No.
do. Uh, as I just said, look it up, do it now, whatever. There are calculations have been run using the small
Yeah.
number of qubit entities that exist, and of course they decay, and it's difficult to keep them in a different state, and all kinds of problems. But just the same as there were problems early on in making chips small. Um,
Yeah.
and for example, you could take a 6-year-old today and give them a bunch of transistors and resistors and things like that,
Yeah.
and say, this is how you build a radio set. And he or she doesn't have to understand how a transistor works
Mm.
at all, and can do it. And so, if you have this idea of the advantage of a qubit being, as we just said, 1 0 or something in between, that's it. I mean, you don't. I don't think you have to explicate or have a deep understanding of quantum physics in order to solve this problem. I mean, it's everything's there. We have a tremendous experience with quantum effects.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would be so arrogant as to explain how wave particle duality works, but it does. I mean, it's there.
Yeah. So here's an alternative perspective. So suppose some extraterrestrial comes out and says, "Hey, I don't understand your petrol burning cars, but I can look at them. They sort of move in one way and then go in the other way. I don't understand the engine, but that's good enough for me." uh, yeah, it won't be good enough to make something fundamental, right? So if you say, well, Microsoft, Google, and the five companies that have 90% of the world's resources say, I'm going to make a silicon mound here and silicon mound there and sequester all the electricity, and I'm going to solve quantum computing. I would argue they're never going to solve quantum computing without a fundamental understanding of quantum mechanics, and we don't have it. I mean, we don't know what it is
Well,
actually.
here's a
Yeah,
challenge for us. Here's a
yeah,
challenge for both of us. The next time we talk, let's have done some research and find out what exactly exists, what exactly has been done.
mm,
Um, and as I say, and I mean, I know it. Well, I say I know. I've read this in. I was reading it in the Financial Times the other day, an
yeah,
interview with the Microsoft guy. Unless he's just lying through his teeth. But there have been other examples from
yeah,
in academic papers where, albeit small number, in,
mm,
the challenge may be much like fusion. We can do fusion for like 10 to the minus 4
of
seconds,
course,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, so we can do it already. We just
mm,
haven't scaled it up. So that would be my argument with quantum computing. We can do it. It's actually solve problems that a normal bit computer can't solve in
yeah. So
millions of
it's a
years.
scale up. It's a scale
Yeah,
up
so scale
problem.
up problem.
Yeah,
Now,
we
does
have
the
the same
scale
thing
up
in life sciences. Yeah,
yeah, well, does the scale up require some additional knowledge of
yes,
quantum physics? I don't know how to answer that. But you could say the same thing for fusion. You could say you
yeah,
know what you need to do, but in order to find some way of closely containing a plasma, we have to come up with some new mathematics or some new insights. Maybe if that's the case, but that's different from saying it's never going to
yeah,
happen, or we need to have some. I don't know. You'll ever get an explanation. Well, I can't say that. I just it will take and I mean it's a cliche, but it will take an Einstein like breakthrough to say
yes.
you've been thinking about this the wrong way. It's not a wave and a particle, it's a something else, that, and this is two properties it can have, I
That's
don't
the part I can agree with, Ian. So engineers have never progressed into step function changes. So you ask them to, design a helicopter or a automobile or an aircraft, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
These things. But if you ask them, well, is a quantum computer is possible? They will say it's possible because I got, 3 qubits, 30 qubits, 130 qubits. But those are not quantum computers. This is some sort of engineering machinations of
Well,
quantum
how do you define a
computing.
quantum?
Yeah.
I mean, I would define a quantum computer as something
Yeah.
that you present a problem to it and it gives a solution.
Mm. No, no.
Oh,
That's not an engineering definition, right? So engineering definition is I want to sort of put together a lot of qubits, and then I can demonstrate to the world that I now have 100 qubits, and they're sort of in a situation that they can actually compute for me. Um, yeah, I think it's possible, but so they say 300 qubits is sort of the limit of how much you need. So you just need 300 qubits to solve the universe, they say. Um, but I have never seen a technology that scales up without a fundamental understanding of what it does.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
you could say Henry Ford was knocking out one Model T every whatever, and now we're knocking out millions of
but
cars
he
an
knew.
hour. What?
Henry Ford knew how the internal combustion engine worked.
Well, but well, yeah, but that didn't that didn't enable the scale up. What enabled the scale up
Oh,
was
scale up is an engineering problem, but
that's what we're
yeah,
talking about. We're talking
yeah,
about the scale because, as I've already said,
yeah.
the 8 qubit quantum computer is already here.
Yeah,
Now,
but you
getting
got
to
to
the
know
300,
what you got to know
no.
what it does,
Well,
right?
if you put
Yeah.
it together, okay. Why don't we let me suggest we get
Yes.
data because we're just kind of
Yes. Yes.
talking across each other or
Yeah.
not. I don't know what
Yeah.
we're doing, but I'm not agreeing with you. That's the important thing.
So let's go to some policy issues here. So it says here two cities, and you would like this, stopped adding fluoride to water. Science reveals what happened. I don't have the article in front of me, but I don't know exactly what happened.
Well,
Yeah.
I read that. What happened is
Yeah.
tooth decay goes up, but not just tooth decay.
Yeah.
CNS brain infections go up, cardiovascular disease increases.
Hmm.
You know,
I know from without knowing anything about it, from an outsider's perspective, adding a chemical into the water appears suboptimal to me, but that's not the case
have you
here.
been in a swimming pool, Gil? Would you go in a swimming pool that hasn't had a chloride treatment, or because you're crazy, you'll get cholera, bilharzia, belly
Yes.
bear, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, but well, I mean, it cannot be an empirical question because we've been doing this for like 30, 40 years.
Yes,
And if you haven't stepped out and asked the questions, what happens if you don't do it?
which has
That's the
happened.
only way you can sort of
Yeah,
compare it,
but
right?
that's
So
been
yeah,
shown from early stages. When they first put it
yeah,
in, they put it
yeah,
into city A, but not B. City A dental caries goes way down.
yeah.
It, it's so
And so
I'm
yeah,
intrigued by your earlier statement. I don't want to quite let you off the hook here. You say, adding a chemical can't be a good thing. Well,
yes,
yeah, I mean the 50s was notorious for, better life through chemistry or something like that.
yeah,
But yeah, chemistry is important, can be very useful, and we'd be crazy not to take advantage of it. If you want to live in a um, pure state without these things, you're not going to
yeah.
live very long, my friend. Do you
So
put
let me ask
sunscreen
you
on? Oh
this.
no, you don't.
No, let me ask you this. So do you have any topic that sort of
Yeah. Well,
yeah?
the
So we
burning
talked about
issues.
microplastics a little bit. I don't have a
Yeah.
lot to add there, Ian. So
Yeah.
it
It was
seems
more
yeah,
just I wanted to
yeah,
just raise that to
yeah,
anybody's consciousness who might be watching this because it
yeah.
seems to me such an interesting problem. The other thing is phosphate, the ability to fix nitrogen
Hmm.
is a real problem in the world. And
Ability to
the
do what? Sorry, ability
to
to.
fix nitrogen. So in order to fertilize
Yeah,
and feed the world, you
yeah.
need nitrogen containing fertilizers.
So you
And
got ammonia and stuff like that, right?
so yes, so fixing, turning nitrogen into ammonia is kind of like the first step in making um, nitrogen containing fertilizers.
Yeah.
That is one of next to concrete. That's one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitting processes,
Hmm.
and um, ultimately we're going to run out of um, our ability and competence to
Hmm.
provide enough fertilizer to grow the food that we need.
Hmm.
Now, this gets onto another thing. Let's just hold that for a moment. We can come back to that in a
Yeah.
minute. But what I find fascinating is the world seems to be riven by anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And they say there are wars and there is the rise of the right wing and all this stuff that's going on. And I'm wondering if that's in part due to um, the dissemination of data.
Hmm.
Well, first of all, the discovery of data and its dissemination by virtue
Hmm.
of the internet and social media.
Yeah.
That
Fake
that's always
news.
the Well, no, it's not fake news. Some of it's fake news, but
Okay.
some of it's real news, right? The
Yeah.
plastic seems to be real. The waste problem seems to be real. The nitrogen fertilizer seems to be real. There are many things that are, quote, real, but
Yeah.
we have only recently become aware of them, okay, because of increased technical competence and looking for these things. So the anxiety that is increasing, if that's indeed true in the world, if
Hmm.
you were, people measure happiness, or if you measure anxiety and quantify it, maybe
Yeah.
it's going up because there are so many things we could talk about. So, for
Yeah.
example, the number of insects, okay. So it's thought that there are perhaps 10 billion species of insects, of which 1 billion are known to man, right?
Hmm.
And of the 1 billion known to man, they've decreased by 40% since 2020. 2020, 5 years, right? So,
Hmm.
and yet they are the fundamental sine qua non of life on this planet.
Hmm.
Nobody knows or care. Well, a lot of people care, but no, so if you really focus on that, my God, bees, right? Bees are disappearing. They pollinate huge numbers of crops. So all these things are happening,
Yeah.
and we can take any one of them, but they are so complex, so huge. There's just nothing we can seem to do about it.
Hmm.
Now, a lot of people will say global warming is at the root of a lot of these problems, and that's probably
Hmm.
true. So we ought to tackle that, but of course, we're never going to. So unless we get back to fusion. So, but I just thought that is kind of an interesting issue that may underline or underpin why we
Hmm.
are so increasingly anxious. I mean, do you
Yeah.
think that's a fair statement that world anxiety is increasing?
Yeah. So anxiety has a lot of implications on your health, on society, on all sorts of things. So I want to go into another topic. I didn't know this actually. What 23andMe's bankruptcy means for genetic data. So 23andMe
Yes, I
apparently
know
has
that. Yeah.
gone bankrupt.
Yes.
Um, as 23andMe prepares to be sold, Science News spoke with two experts about what is at stake and whether consumers should delete their genetic data.
Right.
So there's multiple things here, Ian. So
Sure.
you and
Yes.
I sort of lived through this.
Yes.
So the first sort of larger question is looking at your genome data, is that
Hmm.
useful in
Yeah.
some way? The larger population doesn't seem to think so, or whatever the case may be. Maybe they're ill-educated. I don't know what the reason might be. But my intuition is that yeah, the genome is just too complicated. I mean, you can just programmatically reduce into some numbers and say you're going to get cancer, you're going to get a cardiovascular disease. That seemed um, too unbelievable. And so what is your perspective? Why did 23andMe went bankrupt?
Yeah. So I don't know, I'm aware of this. I've been reading about it too. And there's somebody who's used 23andMe. Yeah. I mean, like I like to come back to something you said, which I
Yeah,
disagree with. And that's that genomic data is useless. That's not true. So
yeah.
for example, um, just take ApoE4, which is if you have ApoE4, you have a much higher chance of developing Alzheimer's disease.
Hmm.
Now, what can you do
But is
about
there an
that?
intervention though? Is there an
Well,
intervention? I'm
that's
being
just what I was
practical.
going to say. What you can do about that is another question. But you could, for example, I mean, Alzheimer's is fraught because of what it's so difficult to get data, as we both know,
Hmm.
because of the chronic nature. You can really pretty much only do it post-mortem, et cetera, et cetera. But in as much as the usual suspects, exercise, intellectual activities, social
Hmm.
connections, all those kinds of things, if you knew that you had this mutation,
Yeah.
then or this particular gene, then you might be a lot more incentive to do those things than
True.
otherwise, right? And that's true for a lot of markets. Clearly, it gets into the whole issue of parenting or parenthood,
Hmm.
where if you both have a Huntington's disease mutation, then your child will have it, whatever. So I mean, there are lots of things it can do, but you are right that the hope perhaps early on that sequencing the genome would then be able to say, well, you're going to get colon cancer at 25, you're going to be a violinist or whatever, hasn't been. It's not going to be true because all nearly every disease except for a small number
Hmm.
are polygenic, and they also interact with the environment. But you could take a lot of diseases um, and look at their incidence in identical twins and fraternal twins. There's clearly a genetic component. So if in identical twins, if one develops schizophrenia or type 1 diabetes or a number of diseases, there's a 50% chance or more that
Hmm.
the other twin will. Whereas with fraternal twins, it could fall as low as 20% compared to a wild type population of 5% or something. So there is something about the genome
Hmm.
that's independent of the environment, since identical twins tend to be brought up in the same environment, um, that confers disease. I mean, that's
Yeah.
true.
But from a very tactical perspective, my question will remain to be, what's the intervention?
Yeah,
So suppose I tell you you're going to get Alzheimer's,
yeah.
and I say, yes, 90% probability you're going to get Alzheimer's, but there's nothing I can do for you. Uh, what's the point in that?
Well,
So, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, go
So,
ahead. Yeah.
it's very much dependent on the disease. So, if I said it's colon cancer, well, the question then becomes: is that independent then of colon cancer, for example, is often associated with diet. If
Mm.
you have a high fiber diet, different things like that. So you might be incented, as I said
Yeah.
earlier, vis-a-vis diabetes, even
Through
Alzheimer's.
diet, you mean? So
Yeah,
diet
so
could. Yeah.
diet could, who
Yeah.
knows, right? Or you may be incented to take something like metformin, which might ameliorate certain cancers. But
Mm.
the other thing it does unequivocally is uh, creates activism. So
Yeah.
think back to HIV, all right?
Yeah.
So when it was the HIV AIDS activism, which I think really helped
Mm.
both understand the disease to prevent its transmission through safe sex, but also stimulated drug production, because there was a, a continual cry. So
Yeah.
if, just to pick something, everyone got, if there was a 90% or whatever high probability genetic marker for some disease, and
Mm.
everybody got tested, and the 20% who are quote going to get this disease are going to
Mm.
start doing something about it. I mean, you hear about it all the time, all
Yeah.
these terrible orphan diseases where the parents are, beating down Congress's doors to get funding for it. So I
Mm.
think there's something that even though there's no therapy, perhaps at the moment,
Mm.
it could provide a form. And again, if you've got a clear genetic marker, well, it's a question, is it a marker or is it a cause? But then you've got the first stage of being able to develop the therapy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so this is very interesting. I mean, it's useful for both of us. It says here, can probiotics actually curb sugar cravings?
yeah,
It says here some companies claim that taking beneficial bacteria can reduce the desire for sugar, but the evidence comes from mice, not people.
yeah.
Um, it seems quite interesting, right? So, I mean, there seems like some sort of therapeutic access here.
Oh, sure.
Um,
This is well
yeah,
documented, Gil.
yeah,
Um, I mean, if you look at people who are overweight, and
yeah,
we have this enormously complex microflora in our metabiome,
mm,
thousands of species of bacteria. There are clear differences in the species that are in obese people versus normal people. And if you do fecal transplants, you can reduce without a change in diet. Well, without doing anything else, just doing a fecal transplant,
yeah,
the people will lose weight. I mean, that in so much so that you can go on YouTube now and find out how to do fecal sampling and make capsules.
mm,
Because it's not a proven medical. I mean, there have been trials, but it's not a proven therapy.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely sure that's true. It's complicated and not really amenable to pharmaceutical intervention because it is so complicated. It's not like
mm,
there's just one kind of bacterium, at least that I'm aware of at the moment,
mm,
other than um, I was reading in The Economist the other week. I don't know if you
mm,
saw this, but um, there is um, a, um, a strain of Escherichia coli, E. coli, which
yeah,
produces, it's called col. Uh, I'm blanking on the name now. Colin something,
mm,
colfibrin or something like that. It's some
yeah,
chemical in case, which increases dramatically the incidence of colon cancer. And if
mm,
you look at the data, young people, 20s and 30s now, are getting colon cancer at a much higher rate than they were
mm,
before.
yeah,
And it's thought to be because this bacterium is now spreading because of global warming and its presence in foods that it didn't used to be in, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
So that just comes back to your question, your point about just the whole health and disease benefits and predictive effects of studying the microbiome.
yeah,
So I'm a big fan of. I mean, I take probiotics
yeah,
because I don't think they're harmful and they could be beneficial, but it's pretty blunt, as opposed to this particular bacterium is really going to
yeah.
grow
I
out
take
the toxic bacteria.
Yeah, I eat a lot of yogurt, and I'm
Yeah,
hoping that the whole community is
yeah.
going to help me. So this is sort of a mystical thing, Ian. So can you actually die of a broken heart? It says here,
Mm,
death by heartbreak doesn't just happen in stories. In real life, severe stress can cause the
exactly.
sometimes fatal.
Right.
Uh, I don't know if I can spell this. Takotsubo syndrome. It says here Takotsubo syndrome. So
Right.
you could actually die of a broken heart.
Yeah,
It
I'm sure
sounds,
that's true. Well, the data will show you that. Um,
yeah,
and it's particularly true in aged couples, right? One dies and then within a few weeks, the other dies. But I was reading this book by a guy called Robert Sapolsky, who is an excellent author. He's written probably 30, 40 books. He's chair of neurology and biology at Stanford. And
yeah,
he's written a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
hmm,
And what he's basically done is looked at the origin, as we were saying earlier, as I was saying earlier, the origins of stress and
yeah,
how um, uh, people can have a high glucocorticoid. level than another.
mm,
I mean, just different day to day.
yeah,
And so when those people experience another stress, so you've got this sort of, for want of a better word, endogenous high stress level.
mm,
And then when you get something like the death of a loved one or loss of a job or something like that, it just makes it so much worse. And of
mm.
course, high levels of glucocorticoid then affect the hypothalamus, the pituitary, whole brain function.
So it's sort of
And
a chemical effect on
yes,
the body.
definitely. It's chemical. Oh,
Yeah,
yes, it's chemical effect. Yeah, yeah, no question
yeah.
about that. Um, and
So I found
it makes
something.
it yeah, it
Sorry.
makes it emotive when you, because we all talk about being heartbroken when you're 16 and you break up with somebody, but that's
Yeah,
not really the same as this profound, and
yeah.
I
So
think
it's
stress-induced response.
stress-induced response. So another interesting thing here I found, Ian. So obesity needs a new definition beyond BMI. Health experts argue.
Hmm.
Experts say clinical obesity is more than a high BMI and instead is a disease in which excess body fat harms tissues, organs, or doing daily activities. Um, yeah, so I haven't gone into the article. I'm not quite convinced about this actually. Excess body fat. I thought fat was good. No?
Well, you surely need it. As you probably well know, it depends where it
Yeah,
is. Um, there's the old, it's been well known, apples versus pears. You know what I mean by that, right? So if you have omental fat, which is fat sort of your
yeah,
omentum is here,
yeah, yeah.
it's far more dangerous to your
Yes, yes,
cardiovascular health
yeah.
than other epidermal fat.
It's sort of
Okay,
a so from a visual perspective, it's sort of where the fat is sort of
is
depositing,
yes,
so to
but at the
speak.
same time, a fat cell is not a fat cell is not a fat cell. So they have different chemistry. They have different susceptibility to hormones,
Yeah,
different ability to release fatty acids in stress and non-stressful situations.
yeah,
Um, and that I think perhaps underpins some of the nature of it's not just your weight. So, for example, obviously, your lean to fat mass, you can have two people who have the same BMI, but
mm,
one may have a much higher fat percentage than the
mm,
other one who has, let's say, very robust, strong, dense bones and a large muscle mass, right?
mm,
Um, and therefore, but I'm not sure in this article, I haven't read it either, to
yeah,
what whether there are other so-called toxic entities. The one thing that fat clearly does and
yeah,
correlates with is cancer. And if you think about it, most cancer-causing chemicals are
mm,
lipophilic. That means they dissolve in fat.
mm,
So if you have more fat, like so breast cancer, for example,
mm,
I mean, one of the reasons, obviously, it's a hormone sensitive tissue, but also it's a lot of fat, right? And so it will, if you're eating things that have chemicals or breathing them in chemicals that enter your bloodstream, which are carcinogenic.
mm,
Um, some of them will be metabolized and excreted, but others will end up in the fat.
yeah,
And those tissues which have fat, such as the breast tissue, um, can then go on to develop cancer. So I think there's definitely an increased mortality in fatter
mm,
people. On the other hand, this is interesting too, and I can't quote the exact amount, but slightly fatter people. So if you're extraordinarily lean, as you
yeah.
get older, there is a danger when you fall, you're going to
Because
break.
you don't have any reserves. If you get an infection, you're going to get wiped
Well,
out.
yeah, but no, it's even more basic than that. It's just
Yeah,
pure engineering. If you fall over and you don't
yeah.
have much fat, you're going to break a bone.
Oh,
Whereas
yeah,
if you have
okay.
some fat, it's like
Yeah,
an airbag, you know.
yeah.
So you could actually be on the overweight BMI score,
Mm,
but actually be have a better longevity
mm,
because, as you know, hip fracture is one of the most leading causes of mortality in older people. Right? They
yeah.
break the hip and all kinds of problems. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know where to go here, Ian. So I got a couple of things that you may want to comment on. So U.S. dementia cases may rise to 1 million per year by 2060.
Yeah.
So dementia is a broad term that there are a lot of different specific disease
Types.
states underneath that.
Sure.
Um, but it's a huge cost to the healthcare system.
Yep.
It's a huge cost to people who are caring for them. Um, it's a huge societal cost. And so he says here baby boomers may drive a drastic increase in dementia cases in coming decades. But the steps people can take to reduce their risk, I'm not sure about this actually. I don't have the article in front of me. Can can people take steps to reduce this risk?
Well, what the article says, because I've read this, it's the same old stuff.
Yeah.
Exercise undoubtedly decreases your susceptibility to Alzheimer's disease. Intellectual activity, um,
Mm.
social
Do we have any
interaction.
data on that, Ian? So
Yeah. I
so
mean,
all the professors, so the data that I have seen is that all the brilliant guys are all dementic at some point.
well, no,
Yeah,
in all seriousness, so there have been studies, and this is close to your heart as you started in this podcast. Nuns, for example, have a
yeah.
lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, that's
Uh,
because they like people. That's different from intellectual thing,
well,
no?
just a minute. Well, yeah, except that they, I mean, they do spend a lot of time reading the Bible, thinking about complex matters. Anyway,
Yes.
um, let's not go down that road. But and social interactions are very,
Yeah.
very important. The other thing not to lose sight of in the Alzheimer's increase is increased longevity. So and I don't know
Mm.
what the data say. If you look at the specific activity of Alzheimer's,
Yeah.
so number of Alzheimer's cases per 1,070-year-olds or 1,080-year-olds, is
Mm.
that increasing or not? Because I suspect that's going to decrease because clearly people are spending a lot more time and interest on their health.
Yeah.
So in the 70s and 80s, all kinds of stuff. But
So I
now
want to ask you. So sorry to interrupt. So I want to ask you something different. So when you get dementia, so do we have any data on um, the dementia patients, dementia, a large category of patients, living longer or less?
I don't
Uh,
know. I imagine I
yeah.
have no data. I don't. I mean, I'm sure there are
Yeah.
data, but I don't have it. But that's a function of quality of care.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if they're not being well looked after, not going to eat appropriately. They're not going to take their drugs for other
Mm.
comorbidities, etc., etc. But coming back to my earlier point, I think this is an important one that we should look at the data on because, as I said, again, my suspicion is that, as I said, I 30 years ago, if you looked at how many 70-year-olds developed dementia per thousand, and you looked at 1,070-year-olds today, I bet it's less because they're
Mm.
exercising a lot more than the 70-year-olds did when they got to be 70, 40 years ago.
Mm.
They're eating better food. They're, perhaps spending more time games, intellectual pursuits. Who knows?
Mm.
But
But that's
on the
a
other hand, can I just
multi.
say one other thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is something we haven't talked about, and perhaps we can defer to a later podcast. What is going to be the effect of screen time on this? Because clearly, kids and young people are being pulled away from social interaction
Mm.
and and spending time on screen. Does
Yeah.
that have a different effect on brain? Is it equivalent in terms of intellectual stimulation to actually talking to somebody?
Yeah.
That might be another interesting thing. But
Uh, my intuition, Ian, I don't know much about this. I haven't seen any data. My intuition is that it depends on the person. So we have great scientists who didn't like talking to others, and they have made great contributions to society.
mhm,
And then we have some people who only like to talk to people. They also
mhm,
made great
mhm,
contributions.
sure.
And so maybe when you're stuck in the middle, like I am, yeah, I did a sort of an assessment. Um, it basically means that you are sort of stuck in the middle, meaning,
It's what you
uh,
call a normal distribution, girl.
yes,
Most of
yes,
us are
yes,
stuck in the middle.
yes. So you won't make any contributions to society, or you could sort of you have this fault lines. I'm making this thing up.
Really?
That you could, sort of drop in, and then you're never seen anymore.
Right.
Sort of things. I mean, that's like 7.7 billion people. I mean,
Sure. I mean, that's true of
yeah,
all of us. That is the tragedy. I mean, I think
yeah,
some of my greatest discomfort is that I spend a lot of time reading, um, and in other ways consuming the intellectual activity of really smart people, but I'm
mm,
not one of them. And so I'm just one of the great ordinary people who get out and do their job or whatever. And it's frustrating because you want to be the one who solves fusion or qubits or whatever, but you're not going to do it. And so you're just stuck here in the middle, and you're going to be subject to the normal incidence of Alzheimer's and colon cancer
yeah.
and depression and anxiety like everybody else.
So let me go on a tangent here. So there are kind of multiple things here. One is, okay, so if your objective function is that you want to be an Einstein or Newton or Maxwell, that's one thing. If your objective function is, yeah, I sort of want to do good things
Yeah.
for the 8 billion people, and that's also a pretty good objective function, right? So, um, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
And you can do it. See, unlike
Yeah.
coming up with uh, general relativity, you can certainly run a soup kitchen. Anyone can do that, or pick up trash on the side of the road, or do pretty much anything, right? That will
Yeah,
help people and make you feel better. I mean, that's the other interesting thing
yeah,
about altruism that I find is
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
It's a real dopaminergic hit.
yeah.
It really is, and uh, people get so much pleasure out of giving money or just picking up somebody's groceries when they drop it, whatever,
Mm,
which costs nothing. So
mm,
you can, and these people who are um, Newton, for example, who seems to be a misanthrope if ever there was one.
mm.
Um, Even though he did amazing things and thought very highly of himself, probably wasn't very happy. Well, I guess back into the whole other issue of happiness and the fins and all that kind of stuff.
No, no, it's really interesting. So, what you're arguing is that there is a sort of a brain function here, that it's not a tactical objective function. So, suppose I count my money or whatever, right? I could go on with that, and I might never reach what I want to reach. But it's a multifactorial objective function, and since some people reach it, and some people don't, right? So you could, yeah, you could run forever to get to what you want to go, where you want to go, and then you drop down and die. It's not a, well, yeah, let
Well,
me leave it at
if
that.
there
Yeah,
is a,
yeah,
a
yeah,
truism or a
yeah,
platitude of life, it's
yeah.
the journey, not the goal. And so a source of uncurable disappointment is
Mm,
having goals, because
yeah.
you achieve them, and no
Yes.
sooner than you've done that, then you've got another one, you're dissatisfied. It's just, I mean, it's the basis of capitalism and so many other things. Whereas relishing the daily life, being grateful for every moment and picking up the trash on the road and helping someone, it's an infinitely better and richer way of nourishing one's life than having these financial or intellectual goals.
Well,
Yeah.
financial and intellectual goals are different. Intellectual goals are more interesting than
Yeah.
financial goals.
Yes, that's true.
Um,
Much more. Yeah.
so I want to finish up with something that you and I find very interesting. So it says here, AI could transform healthcare, but will it live up to the hype? I have the answer to that, but I'll let you react to it. AI has the potential to make healthcare more effective, equitable, and humane, it says here. Whether tech delivers on these promises remains to be seen. Yes. So what do you think? Yeah.
Well, we have discussed this off camera many times. I am I am convinced that AI will be of enormous benefit in two different aspects. As I often say, I you just look at I'm covered in moles and spots and freckles. I'm a walking, time bomb for melanoma. So I'm often saying to my dermatologist, AI is going to put you out of a job. And he says,
Mm,
yeah, I know, I know. So would I rather go in and get a whole body scan of my
yeah.
skin and have a computer look at it and say, that's this, that's that, that's that, than having some guy, looking with a magnifying glass here, there, and hope he sees everything? Yes. Will it
Yeah.
be better? Yes. No doubt. I don't know how anyone can argue against that. The other side
Mm,
of the coin, though, oh, well, it's sort of the same, but access to physicians is very difficult, as we all know.
mm, yeah.
If you get a pain in your shoulder or something, trying to get into somebody
Mm,
and then having to wait for an MRI and then it's terrible.
yeah.
Whereas if you could have a virtual assistant, right?
Mm,
It comes on and you describe your symptoms. Okay, they may get it wrong. They may miss some social cues that only a human brain could detect. But the
yeah.
chances are they can quickly assimilate all your historical data,
Mm,
and ask you 5 questions and say, oh, that's a pulled muscle, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. Or,
yeah.
oh no, that's a myasthenia gravis issue. You better go and do this, that, and the other.
Mm,
So, and then you get into places where, let alone the Western, or whatever you want to call the developed world, imagine being in Africa where there are no doctors for huge swaths of the population. Having an iMac in the village hall or something,
mm,
driven by a solar cell, which you could ask these questions.
yeah.
Got to be better, right?
Yeah. So I had a primary care physician for like 30 years, and he retired. And every decision I made in the last 30 years was a mutual decision.
Hmm.
So he'll ask me, do you really want to take Lipitor?
Hmm.
I'll say, well, is it that bad? Um, so doctors, and I had a podcast on this some time ago. Um, it is sort of a social sciences field,
Hmm.
because we haven't really systematically solved any problem, I would argue. uh, is putting chemicals into the body, it could tactically solve some things, but at the end of the day, it is the brain. And if you have a doctor that you trust, you'll get better. If you don't have a doctor you don't trust, you're not going to better. I mean, you can take all the medications in the world and you're not going to get better. So it's a social sciences, life sciences, I would argue. It's a social sciences field. What do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't disagree more. Um,
Okay.
I have I have good friends who they're educated people
Hmm.
who who just won't take drugs, or kicking and screaming. They run
Yes.
100, a cholesterol of 220. And
Yeah.
it's just what you say. You go into the physician, and the physician will say, look, if you don't do something, you're going to have a heart attack.
Hmm.
Statistically, in the next 10 weeks, they'll learn 10
Hmm.
years. Um, but you've got to feel that's right, da, 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 da. And then they got some woo-woo stuff, and then they, God forbid, they read the package insert,
Yeah.
and there's nausea, da, 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 I'm not taking this stuff is fatal. And whereas if a machine says, well,
Hmm.
Mr.
That's
Eapen,
interesting. Yeah.
your probability of dying from this, according to 2 million papers I just looked at, is 83%.
I'm
All
in
right.
there. I'm in there
Yeah,
right now. Yeah.
right. So, and I think the worst thing you can do is
Yes.
consult with somebody who's completely ignorant about. It's like going into a car mechanic, and the guy
Mm,
looks at it and says, "Oh well, you know, you've got your engine's missing on the third cylinder. We need to
mm,
replace that." And then say, "Well, what do you think?" "Oh, I don't know. Should I replace that?" No, it doesn't happen. I don't know why it's any different. Now, the other thing that you do bring in, though, which is a different issue, is um, psychosomatic. So somatic effects of
yeah.
not only drugs but also, yes, if you respect, and I think that's what happened 100 or 50 years ago. You go and see your GP, he or
Mm.
she exudes this sort of benevolent competence. Yes, he's going to fix
Yes.
me. And even if he doesn't, gives you two aspirin or a sugar pill and you get better,
Yes.
right? I mean, we know that happens,
Yeah.
but I would much rather have a machine that as I say, can look at 2 million or 2 billion data
Uh,
points and give me a probability.
yeah, I'm not sure about that, Ian. So it's sort of a societal question. So suppose, I got, robots cleaning my house. I trust that robot, actually. I mean, that robot cleans stuff pretty good, So there is a sort of belief question, which is, do I believe in technology? I do. I believe in technology. So you and I might be pretty okay with that machine, but I'm not sure about the rest of the population. I mean, not rest of the population, but I don't know about the large percentage of the
Mm.
population
They
that
may
would
not
be,
be,
yeah.
yeah, they may not be, but I don't know that that's a reason not to have that as an option.
Mm,
Now, I suppose that the question to make it more um, extreme is to say, okay, well, in this insurance program, you have
yeah,
the option to see a person, you know, GP, and that
yeah,
will cost you $1,000 a month. Or you
yeah.
can go to the machine, which costs you, let's say,
10
800 a month. I
bucks.
don't know. No, no, let's make it, not so crazy, but 500, whatever.
Yes.
Um, and uh, the people who choose, in my mind, the people who choose the person are then saying that an individual person is going
Mm,
to know more about the
yeah.
medical literature than this machine, which I know is not true. I just know is not true.
But it's not a knowledge question. It's a question
Okay.
of trust, right? So,
What
um,
is, I mean, trust
yeah.
is engendered by data and knowledge.
No, not necessarily. So, because we have so much uncertainty now in Homo sapiens, I can guarantee you that we had made bad decisions in the past because we see a lot of bad people here. It's sort of a larger sort of optimization problem. So if what you say is true, that I'm going to go with the right decision, the right optimization program, yeah, we won't be here. I mean, we went with the wrong programs. We went with the wrong people most often in our evolutionary history.
Well, I'm not sure what parallels you're making because
Yeah,
I'm using the statement. All right, yeah, AI we all know is fraught with hallucination and blah 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 blah. But assuming for a moment that on something that doesn't involve politics or, I mean, it's hard data. I mean, so if it's looking. Take statins. That's a classic example. A lot
yeah,
of people don't take statins. They don't like to take
yeah.
drugs, right? And yet, I don't know how many studies of statins there are, but a hell of a lot, right? And so you can look at all those data, and then you can
Mm.
look at the same people who don't take it, and they have a higher cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. I mean, they just
Well,
do.
I just saw a study, Ian, that statins are highly correlated with dementia,
Mm.
and so I'll send you that study.
Okay.
Um, And so statins have a tactical effect. I mean, my HDL to LDL is like 1.0. and I
Mhm.
take atorvastatin. I don't know what's going to happen to me, 20 years down
Yeah.
the road.
Yeah.
We're not
But
tracking
nor
that.
does the GP. I mean, you're
Yeah,
raising another point.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
relevant to the issue we were discussing,
Mm,
because I would further say an AI machine is much more like, I mean, is much more likely to say, oh, here are the risks. Okay. If you take a statin, boom, boom, boom. But Joe or Mary Blow, the physician, well, have they read the latest New England Journal of Medicine paper on the, you know,
mhm.
probably not.
Yeah.
So that's not a fair comparison. It just isn't. In fact, it just reinforces my point, because the side effect or the comorbidity or something that could be engendered by
Mm,
taking a drug is going to be known by AI. Now, you could say
mm,
that the insurance companies will jigger the algorithms on the AI to push certain
mm.
drugs, or minimize prescriptions to keep costs down, or whatever. All that's true. But I'm
Yeah.
just thinking, in the ideal world where you have an unbiased machine that just looks at all the data
Mm,
and takes your record, and then a human who can't look at all the data with all the will in the world, and has 5 minutes with you in the office, right? Because the
mm.
insurance company says next. I mean, literally, I mean, we both know this. I have good friends who are GPs who said, I haven't given 7 minutes. And somebody
Mm,
comes in and says, oh, doctor, I've got such terrible back pain here, and I'm really
mm,
worried about it. And you've got 7 minutes to figure out whether it's cancer, pulled muscle,
mm.
psychosomatic, her husband beats her, whatever. I mean, yeah, well, it's serious. You can't do that.
Yes.
Whereas
Yeah.
a machine can ask you all these questions and more.
Yeah.
I'm not
No,
convincing you, obviously.
I think it's all true. What I'm not convinced about is the farmer bias on the problem, which
No,
is
no,
we can treat anything with chemical means.
no, no, I don't
Um,
agree with that.
okay.
No, not
And
yet.
so, yeah, so, yeah, I mean, on the CNS side, I would say we haven't quite explored the
No,
electromagnetic aspect
sure,
of the brain.
right.
And I think we will do a lot better than chemical because we have a checkered history
Yes.
to try to influence CNS with chemicals. But on the other hand, the metabolic syndrome and other things, we know that metformin works. Well, it seems to work. I don't know all the data. We know statins work, seems to work as well. And so, yeah, so we have some chemical agents that seem to do good things for the human body. If you don't have access to them, you are in a sort of a bad situation. And these are off patterns. So, these things shouldn't cost you a lot, right? From a general population perspective. And so every GP, I mean, if you go to a GP, so this goes into the policy question again. I mean, can we get everybody in the US to a GP at least once a year? That alone will reduce the healthcare problems that we are having, right? So,
Maybe,
many of
but
us,
I don't. Well, I mean,
no,
it comes back
yeah,
to my earlier comment, Gil. If they've only got 5 minutes, I doubt it. And I think all that the GP could do is prescribe them a beta blocker, an aspirin, and a statin. And if that alone, if that's what it takes to get people to take it, then yes.
yes.
But that's the only thing, because you're not going to. That's not going to make most. People go for their annual checkup. Complete waste of time.
Mm.
Complete and utter waste of time. I
Yeah.
would. I've asked GPs this. You go and listen to your heart. They look at your tongue. I mean, they say, who's the president? They tell you three things at the beginning. Can you tell them the three things at the
Yes.
end? Ridiculous. And it costs something like $400. Or really ridiculous.
Yes, yes,
I
yes,
mean,
yes. Yeah.
so you mentioned something about. I mean, if there's one truism that's been the case since the dawn of time, poor
Mm,
people have less access to healthcare than rich
mm,
people.
yeah.
AI can change that. because I was saying earlier 1,000 versus 500. As you said, it's more likely 1,000 versus a buck or
mm,
$2. So if a government, for example, were to make an AI GP available,
mm,
wrote this amazing program, ensured that it wasn't being corrupted by pharmaceutical or insurance companies,
mm.
that would be a huge health benefit. Huge.
So when you say AI can change it, you're assuming that people have access to AI.
Yeah. Well, so I
Um,
mean,
yeah.
it would be access to the internet. I mean, I mean, pretty much everyone's got access to the internet. Oh, well, that's another
Mm,
issue, Gil. But come on.
yeah.
No, you don't start down that because that's not being fair.
Yeah.
All right, put it like this. More people have access to the internet than have access to a human GP. Guaranteed.
Possibly. Uh,
I'll bet you a lot
because
of money.
remember, there are powerful motivations around this, right? So you are suggesting there is a more optimal solution.
Hmm.
All the insurance companies, or the pharmaceutical companies, or the internet companies have a desire not to make this happen. So it is totally a policy question. It's a. I
Mm.
mean, many people have
Yeah, no.
found very good solutions to these things, uh, but it's not going to happen.
No,
Uh,
well, that's a different issue. And so, Gil,
yeah.
you're moving off I mean, the core issue that
Mm,
we started discussing is would AI be better than GP? And
mm.
we, for some reason, you don't agree, and I can't understand that. But now you're saying you're on a different issue about, of course, can you ever
No, I just
achieve
want
that?
the net result of it, right? So
Okay.
I could be a technologist and, have supervised machine learning is going to solve all problems. Um, None of this AI things, Ian, I believe, is not going to solve anything at
Uh,
all.
So I guess what you're really saying is that
Yeah.
in theory, well, I'm not even sure you're saying that. Perhaps I should rephrase my statement by saying, in theory, if we could get
Yeah.
an AI program that has access to PubMed, to all the clinical data,
Mm.
just say, bear with me, that, you know, within, all right, 70% of it, I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
can pull up PubMed now, and if I've got the time, I
Yeah.
could put in all my symptoms and find out what correlates, blah, 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 blah. I'd be dead before I got the answer. Whereas an AI program could do that, right?
Mm.
And if it could also be protected, perhaps the way in which allegedly bank accounts and other things are protected, so that insurance companies can't skew it, or
Mm.
whatever. I don't see how that couldn't be of benefit
So,
to
so
people.
you're making it programmatic, Ian. So we have to go fairly soon here. So you're
Okay.
making it very programmatic. So think back to the large pharmaceutical companies that we work with, and um, on the business side, I try to make it programmatic. Didn't quite work. On the life sciences side, on the medicine side, you made it programmatic. That also didn't quite work. In the sense that, yeah, it is not that easy to see truth, um, from a very noisy, uncertain data.
Mm.
So that's what we have in life sciences. We have very, very
Yeah,
uncertain and noisy data.
yeah,
So people can come up with all sorts of hypotheses and all sorts of things.
sure.
They get promoted, and some of them don't. And then they say, well, I found this drug or that drug. No, none of those things actually actually going to do any difference to humanity. Yeah, let me go a little further. No pharmaceutical company has done anything interesting from my perspective.
Yeah, I disagree strongly with that. Gil. I
Okay.
thought you were onto something interesting there before you
Yeah.
jumped off the rails. One is, um, yeah, we're not talking about physics, and
Yes.
so the clinical data, which is really what we're talking about, that's out there,
Mm.
is necessarily gray. Let's put it like that. It's not black or white.
Yes.
Often, okay.
Yes.
But as somebody who programs and massages or interprets large amounts of data,
mm,
I you I would think you would agree that by asking the question by going in and saying my cholesterol is this, my
mm,
LDL is this, HDL is this, and triglyceride is this. What do you suggest I do?
mm.
And it looks for studies,
Yeah.
and I think that it could then also assign a probability, and it can say based on your numbers there are X thousand, you could even put it like this, there are X thousand papers that have said
Yeah.
you would benefit from a statin and Y thousand that you wouldn't. And there are
Well,
Z thousand that say these side effects, you know? And so you could make an informed choice.
so um, I mean, this is sort of so suppose I say the HDL to LDL ratio. The people who come to the emergency room with heart attacks has an HDL to LDL ratio of 2.0, oh sorry, LDL to HDL ratio of 2.0, and hence I conclude that you should get it down to less than 2.0, which seems like a reasonable conclusion. But then I have to look at the cohort of people who had heart attacks.
Yeah.
Is LDL to HDL ratio sort of a symptomatic thing?
Oh, you couldn't do it
Uh,
just on that
yeah,
one point. I mean, I
yeah,
think you're trivializing the algorithm. I mean, it's going to be much more sophisticated than that. And
mm,
as in the hypothetical case, I said you give all the numbers, you give your age, you give your comorbidities, because the AI program will ask you that. Well, what's your weight? What's your height? What's your BMI? Do you have history of this in your family or that in your family?
mm.
Blah, 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 blah. And then look at the numbers. Use all that, not just a simple ratio of HDL to LDL.
But so what if I do a linear regression between do you have any heart disease in your family
Yeah.
against something, and I
Hmm.
I use no cholesterol thing,
Right.
no lifestyle thing.
Right.
I suspect you're going to find a pretty robust relationship.
Yeah, there will
Um,
be. Sure, because a
so
lot of
this, so
it's
then
genetic.
so what is the cholesterol doing for us?
Well, it's disaggregate. I mean, there will be a correlation, but there will be errors in that, right? And
Yeah,
those errors will be engendered by exercise, diet, comorbidity, where do you live, what your stress level is, 1,000 things, right? And the only way you can normalize those is by increasing the number, right? But
mm,
if that's why if you have more things than just family history, if you have family history and total cholesterol, you get a
yeah,
much tighter correlation, and they're much tighter with HDL and much tighter and much tighter. Mm.
excellent, Ian. So
Excellent.
this
That's
this
always
this
fun,
this
Gil.
has been great. Yeah. So we'll
Yeah.
do it again
Yes, we
next
shall.
Saturday. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, Gil. I'll see you.
See you.